I used to have this tradition where I would go backpacking for at least a week at a time, like completely isolated in the woods, like all of my gear is on my back because I needed to disconnect and truthfully feel insignificant in the world in the best way possible. I think in LA, that's been more intertwined in my day to day so that I don't have to go on these like massive excursions as often. I still do just for fun because I like them, but it wasn't, me
It's not like an
escaping
existential
anything.
crisis trip that you have to go
Exactly.
on, twice a year. We don't really get the opportunity to reflect that much about our careers. We just are like too busy doing them. And so sometimes
Yeah.
like people have the nice opportunity to like think about things in a different way than they have maybe processed it
Yeah.
internally for a long time. I want to be real with people about the good things and the bad things about their jobs. I want people to understand what the highs and the lows are for different types of
Yeah.
roles because nobody was telling us that stuff in college. I feel like we only got surface level positive information from people, especially because I feel like the people that graduated a few years before us, if you did have a career conversation with them, they wanted to like save face for their own decisions. They're like, yeah, like it's
Yeah.
great for all these reasons. And it wasn't always like the most realistic take on things, I don't think. Emily, thank you so much for coming on this week's episode. I'm so excited for our guests to hear all about your career journey and what it means to be in strategy and biz ops. I know that is a buzzword that is going around. Lots of people are interested in it, yet it's kind of vague. Not everybody knows what it is. So I'm really excited to have you on this week and for you to give us a little bit of insight into what that career path looks like.
Thanks, Amanda. So happy to be here and happy to chat through my career so far. I'm Emily Marion. Currently, my title is commercial manager at Venmo, but like you had said, a lot of people know this as biz ops and strategy at other companies. And essentially, I am responsible for helping to either monetize our products or optimize the cost structure and some of the operational processes that we currently have to grow the overall business. It is a remote job, and it's my first remote job. So I'm based in
Oh,
LA, and my team is actually split between New York City and San Jose, and it's literally like just me and my manager in LA, and we're on completely opposite sides of the city, so we don't even see each other in
oh yeah.
person.
Opposite sides of the city in LA could be like a different state. Like if you're on the East Coast, that could be so far.
Yeah. It's
And with
like,
that
oh,
traffic,
is it 30 minutes or is it 2 hours? We don't know, and we won't know until
you
we
won't
get
know
on the
till you get in the
highway.
car. Oh my God. Driving in LA is one of the most stressful things.
Honestly, I grew up on the East Coast. I lived in New York City for almost 5 years. When I moved to LA, it took me 3 months to get a car, and I forced my then boyfriend, now husband, to drive me everywhere because I was like, I can't do this.
How are you like living in LA despite the traffic? And how are you dealing with being remote and feeling kind of separate from your colleagues?
I guess one good thing is because I have family that's still on the East Coast, I have taken it upon myself to like make the extra effort to go into the office whenever I'm visiting for holidays or, like big life milestones and getting that face time that way. I also just generally, it's as annoying as it kind of is my biggest tool as a remote employee, which is just like setting up those one on one informal chats where at least you can talk about what's going on in the workplace in a more informal setting and like building up that candor and building up that relationship because you don't get the like pass bys in the office that people normally would, or you don't really get to see all of the like in person stuff that's happening as much.
So let's talk a bit about your role at Venmo. Really interested to hear what your job is on the day to day to understand what it means to be a commercial lead. So, if you had to explain your job to someone who doesn't know anything about it, what would you say that it is?
I would separate it into two buckets, like forward looking stuff and then what is happening in the present day. And so in the forward looking bucket, it's all about what new initiatives can we fund, such as like building a new product, going into a new market. What would that drive for our business in terms of users or revenue, things like that? So I work a lot on understanding what is the opportunity size and what does it mean for the business. In
Mm,
the like current bucket of like what we're doing right now, a lot of it is explaining trends within our business. Why is our user growth the way that it is? why are our engagement metrics the way that they are? Or how can we improve things that are not super optimized about the business, whether it's from like a cost structure perspective or, managing our customer support org, things like that. Commercial leads from all across Venmo, not just myself, have input into.
It almost sounds like a lot of things that I have done at startups, but Venmo I wouldn't necessarily consider a startup anymore. So how would you explain the relationship between the existing product that Venmo has that I think everybody knows, like the peer-to-peer payments, with what are like the new products? I don't know that people necessarily understand when there is a pre-established company that has, one core product. What does it mean to be working on other product launches, or what are some of the things that Venmo has cooking that are like not,
Yeah.
the main thing that everybody's heard of?
Yeah, and that's actually a super good question because I specifically work on our business profiles product, which not a lot of people actually know about.
Yeah, what
So,
is that?
business profiles essentially is a separate profile from like your normal personal profile that you use to pay your friends or your family. And it's intended to be used for like small businesses, side hustlers who are really trying to separate out their personal transactions from their business transactions. So you can think about like the local flower salesman that goes to your farmer's market, or like even someone at the hair or nail salon that's helping to render you a service. They could open up a business profile and manage all of their business payments and also get like specific business features through Venmo. An interesting thing about my job is because we are so well known as a company and as a brand for peer to peer, because we have these like commerce products, how do we integrate it and find a good overlap? Or do we actually have to go after a completely different audience of users? Understanding the pros and cons of trying to build out an ecosystem or a platform, or really just have a suite of like disparate products, almost kind of like, I'd probably say the Microsoft suite, where like you're using different products for very specific tasks.
That's really interesting. I think this is something I could use. Like I formed my LLC back in the fall. And for doing any like freelancing or accepting payments for sponsorships, those kinds of things could be done via Venmo. But like, you want things to be separate and organized so we can get those, tax write-offs. It's a painful time to be talking about this as it was just tax day.
I feel for you guys. I hear the stories through like user research, and some people are managing like $1 million businesses on spreadsheets, and I don't know how they do it. Like literally checking off every single transaction that comes in. I'm like,
it's insane.
There's got to be a better way.
Yeah. I think it's helpful for people who are listening to understand that even big companies that we all know already for their like one core product, they often have teams that are working toward product launches. They're working on new innovations. Even back when I was in consulting, they had basically like a ventures program, which was supposed to kind of help to accelerate some small businesses. And they did some like very discounted consulting. So if you're someone who's interested in like new product development, it's not just a startup that you could go to work for in order to have that experience. But I am curious to know if there's some questions that you should be asking when you're interviewing for a role, or like any signals to someone who's job searching about whether the environment that they'd be joining would be product focused and developing new products, or it's really like maintenance and business growth that the company's more interested in.
I think this could probably apply outside of tech, but my experience is mostly in tech at this point, where you really should find out if the company has a mission that is very crystal clear and where they are in their journey to like accomplishing that mission. For example, PayPal owns Venmo, and like PayPal's mission was always to like democratize financial services. And we were a pillar underneath that, basically trying to drive hypergrowth within a younger demographic.
Seems like it's working.
Yeah. And so when I was interviewing, I was asking, like, what are you guys super excited about that you're working on right now? And where do you think it's going to be in the next 6 to 12 months? And based on the answers I got, you could kind of suss out, like, are they in business maintenance mode and just kind of keeping the lights on? Or are they really trying to dive deeper into discovery of new areas for them to grow. So I would definitely just see generally like how people are feeling about the short-term, medium-term, long-term prospects, and also like how much opportunity is there for them to actually explore those prospects and like do the research, do the testing, eventually do the building. Some of that will be dependent obviously on like prioritization and resourcing, which you probably won't get as much insight into in like an interview process. If you're on LinkedIn and you see a company is like hiring like crazy, you can probably guess that they just got a bunch of money that they're trying to really ramp up something that's being built off the ground. So those are like
Yeah.
a few hints that I would probably look for if I was really interested in getting on the ground floor of something.
Yeah, and maybe asking in the interview, like, what are some of the new initiatives or some of the new priorities that the business is focusing on? Because if you're someone who wants to be in product innovation, you want to be
Mm-hmm.
looking for those companies that have like an incubator system within them or a, division of the company that's focused on new product development and not, like you said, not just focused on maintenance mode or business as usual. So I'm really curious how at Venmo you think about monetization because I've worked in really small early stage startups and monetization is always a very tough challenge to crack and it's also super urgent. It's always the thing that, you're just trying to beat the clock in terms of getting revenue from your product. So, how are you all thinking about monetizing the business profiles?
I also think about this often because I think it's not something that we've quite cracked. Like the business product does make money, and the way that it makes money, you could find this on Google. Basically, we charge a transaction fee on every single business transaction that is received. And kind of the overall rationale of why a business owner would be willing to pay that transaction fee versus just using like their personal Venmo account is we offer a better value prop that is more specific to what business owners actually need in order to run a business. Added tax reporting features, added biz ops features, whether it's you want to be able to like add sales tax, add tipping, etc. And then we have this whole roadmap that we are trying to build out that is going to hopefully be able to answer some additional key questions that a lot of businesses need in order to grow, whether it's like, how do I get more customers? How do I get them to be loyal to my business? So like building out things that kind of address those issues. Where it's rough is because like our business is the majority driven by P2P. We have this really ingrained reputation in people's head of like what job we accomplish as an app, and being able to like diversify our revenue streams into these other things has been definitely a challenge that we've been trying to work through. And I think honestly, in my personal opinion, it's because we need to have cohesion across the product. We haven't quite gotten there, but we're on our way to doing that. But generally, like really listen to your customers, how you figure it out. And like, how do you have distinct enough revenue streams such that it actually makes sense that they're distinct and they can drive additional value and they're not like reliant on each other too much, is kind of how we think about it. I think from a very like personal finance POV, it's like you want to be able to have your W-2 income, but then maybe you also want like side hustle income. And then maybe you also want to have dividends off of your investments that you have. And all of those things work together, but they aren't all necessarily like super overlapped in a Venn diagram. Also, just like generally, I would say you can test into it a bit, like depending on the size and scale of the company and the business, because it doesn't just have to be that we are like adding a price to this thing. It could be bundling or it could be volume based. So there's like different pricing constructs that you can test into in order to see what actually makes sense for the product or service that you're offering, but also, the end customer that is receiving it.
Can you talk a bit about at your level as a commercial lead? Is your role to come up with these different monetization experiments, or does somebody else who's like higher up set the direction for where the product is going to go, including the tests? And then your job is more like running those and reporting back on results and suggesting improvements. Where do you kind of fit into that equation?
That's a pretty good question. I think you had a previous episode with like one of your consulting friends on where you mentioned this like V shape of a
Yes.
manager where you get like shit from one side of the hierarchy that's above
Literally.
you and then shit from the other side that's below you that you're trying to help support. I would say, with respect to the question you just asked, it's both. So it's you have to sometimes come up with the ideas of how are we going to test this, and you need to be the one that's like initiating the brainstorm and the mind meld. And at other times, you have to be the one that's like doing all of the in the weeds detail work about validating whether this test makes sense or what this construct makes sense, synthesizing like insights you get from the analytics team or any of the like researchers, and how you can actually take that and make it into something actionable. So it totally depends on honestly what's like happening during the day, but you have to play both sides.
I think that's very common for our level, like where we are in our
Yeah.
careers, being, about 7, 8 years in, is you start to have more ownership and more ability to influence the product and influence the team, which is great. But you're like
Yeah.
not at that point yet where you get to like really drive and make all the decisions. And so therefore you kind of get stuck in that V pattern. But I think it's great that you're able to start having that influence, even if it kind of, comes and goes, like ebbs and flows with projects and sort of what is the mood of the day.
Yeah. And I'll
It's
definitely say that, like, in the company that I'm in right now, I think honestly, I get more opportunity to, like, be the initiator instead of being in that supporting role than someone with, like, my years of experience normally would if, I were to be in, like, a bigger consulting firm, or if I stayed at my first job, which was in finance.
yeah, that's awesome. Congrats. Do you feel
Thank
like
you.
that impacts your job satisfaction?
For sure. Yeah. I think something I realized when I was like through the door of my first role, I was previously working in asset management. And it was like your very stereotypical finance job where everyone was like kind of cutthroat. There was a very well pre-described path of promotion, and basically no exceptions were made. It was just like,
Relatable.
yeah, like time in the seat. And then if you made it, you made it.
Yeah.
And that was kind of it. That was so frustrating to me. And I think honestly, for so long, I was so impatient, and it made me kind of angsty in my job. And the moment that I was like extracted from that environment, I felt this huge weight lift off my shoulders, and I could honestly feel myself like relax and also take a beat and understand that I can still be ambitious and I can still be really high achieving, but I don't need to be like fighting to get the most excellent rating every single time, because, it doesn't really matter. Like,
Yeah.
I'm having a good time. I feel way better than I did when I worked in that old role, and
Oh,
I have a life
cheers to
outside
that.
of work.
Oh my God. Preach.
Yeah.
That's like what everybody's looking for. It's job satisfaction, financial security, and
Yeah.
to be able to sleep at night. I totally relate to that. I feel like in consulting, there were these such specific set expectations of what you were going to accomplish by what time. And
Yeah.
if you didn't, you were kind of like looked down on, like, why are you not progressing as fast as these other people around you? And so there was a lot of that pressure.
Yeah.
And I just don't think that that's necessary for you to succeed. As everyone who listens to my podcast knows, I'm not the biggest fan of consulting or the structure that comes along with it and all the red tape. But I was able to grow so much
Hmm.
after leaving consulting that those like very silly artificial milestones and things that were set, I just look back and I'm like, why was I stressed about that?
Yeah, I almost think that we were in our own like echo chamber being in
Yes.
those types of companies, because they bring you in classes, so you have like 200 to 2000 other like fresh new grads around you, and you all are just talking with each other and
Yeah.
spinning in circles like, did you get this certification? Did you get this promotion? Did you do this? And it
And you're like,
become
what is that? Oh my
yeah,
God, how
like
why do they know about this and I don't? Am I behind? Am I, what am I doing
yeah.
wrong?
Exactly. It's like all you can talk about for a while. And
Yeah.
to be honest, I don't think it's awful if you're the type of person who like lacks structure in their life.
Yeah, and
And
needs
you need
that
like
to thrive.
exactly. You need like a little bit of a softer landing post grad where like you have this playbook written out for you.
Yeah.
But I think people have very different tolerances to it and for how long. And I just reached my tolerance like pretty early.
I totally agree. I think echo chamber is a great way to describe being in consulting, finance, any of those places, like you said, with
Yeah.
a cohort or a start class. It's so culty too. It's like you got to get in, you got to drink the Kool-Aid, in order to progress up the ladder. It's up or out. I agree that I think that time was beneficial for like getting some structure, figuring out just what the fuck I was doing with work.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
once I didn't need that anymore, it felt like really stifling, and I'm glad that I got out of there.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the benefits also of those types of situations, which I don't know if this, like, as an aside, but I remember speaking to my brother who is a director of engineering. He's always been a software engineer. And I was like, I hate my finance job. It is so robotic and it's stifling. And I just feel like I'm not getting anywhere. I want to do this other thing. And he's like, you're in such a massive company that employs like 250,000 people. Why don't you just try to figure out how you can get that experience within the company you're already in? So, like, at least you have a little bit of a safety net with your network. You know that pay is not going to be something crazy out of line from what you're already getting. And you can kind of figure it out before taking this like huge leap of faith into something that's way more unknown.
And did
That's
that work for
another,
you?
it did surprisingly.
Really? Because I always thought that was like a crock of bullshit. Like I worked for Accenture, which employed 500,000 people. And so everybody would say
Yeah.
the same thing. They were like, oh, you can like go and do startup-y stuff here. And I was like, shut up. Like, just stop. That
I
this
know.
is never going to be an early stage startup, no matter what kind of ventures group I get into. Granted, did I try that hard? No. But it just, I don't know. There is something about the overarching culture that you can't change, even if like the day-to-day work that you do can change. So I'm
Yeah.
curious, like, did that work well for you? Did you enjoy that?
So I got what I wanted, and it wasn't what I enjoyed because I
Okay.
didn't think critically hard enough of actually what I wanted. So I started off as an investment analyst right out of college at JP Morgan, which basically was me helping portfolio managers trade stocks, do some research, and then also like truthfully be almost like a glorified secretary in some aspects.
Everything about that sounds truly awful to me. I'm sure it appealed at one point, but wow,
Yeah.
nope.
Yeah, it was I think I didn't quite understand what I was getting myself into, and then when I got into it, I was like, okay. This is definitely like an entry level job that they just want to prove you are reliable, you have attention to detail, but like your hard skills at the first 3 years of being an analyst didn't have to be crazy. And after that, I actually went into a chief of staff role for one of the business heads within JP Morgan. So I had said that I wanted to do something more strategic. I wanted to be able to understand how like to run a business. And I was contemplating basically going to business school or trying to completely move out of my company and go like the classic consulting route
Which, let me
role.
tell you, would not have told you how to run a business either,
Yeah.
because that was my same thought. I was like, I want to learn how to run a business. I want to know how people start companies. And
Yeah.
I just realized the longer I stayed in consulting, the further away I was going to be from that realm.
Yeah. And I didn't realize that until I did this chief of staff role because I think the term that my brother used to use is you are a big talking head. And I was like, that is exactly true. Like, I do absolutely nothing
Yeah.
except asking other people and like praying for their like grace and mercy to fill out the slide deck
Yep.
that I'm
Yep.
trying to get done. And so it was so tough for me to understand like the purpose that I was supposed to find within that second role and also have the fulfillment. I think obviously like some of the effects of the pandemic coinciding with that job definitely had an impact, and like all of the cool sexy things that were associated with it, like traveling and going to conferences and stuff, weren't on the table for me. But I realized so quickly, one, how hard I can work, and two, how I don't want to be under that amount of stress and like expectation for a long period of time, like ever again. Like
Yeah.
my husband had to send me a weighted blanket so that I could like fully relax and sleep at night, because I would be up until
Oh
11
my
like
God.
working on decks, and then I'd get straight into bed and worry that it wasn't ready and wasn't good enough for like the next day's review. And that was such a crazy thing to be doing for
A
like,
literal non-emergency.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, when I look back on my early career, I wish I had known this expression back then, but like some funny, snarky marketing TikToks are literally like, we're PR, we're not in the ER, okay? There's no emergencies. And I wish I would have had that mantra back then, because everything always felt like an emergency. It always felt like, oh, some MD needs something, some, high up client needs something, and like the world's going
Yeah.
to end if I don't get it to them by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. And that is just it's just not true. But when you're in that echo chamber, it really does feel like that. And your
Mm-hmm.
performance is measured on whether or not you meet those deadlines, whether or not you make those clients happy. So it feels real, even though now I know it is not real.
Yeah. I think also, depending on like the industry you're in, it can feel more real. Definitely working with like institutional clients and having real money, it felt scary, but truthfully, there were enough safeguards and like guardrails such that I wouldn't completely like blow up someone's $1 billion portfolio.
Yeah.
Um,
Which
but
has
it
like a little
definitely
more stakes to it.
but yeah, like being in tech, it's a little bit more chill, and people are definitely like, we're not performing brain surgery. It's,
Yeah.
a fun
Yeah.
app that people
hmm
send money to their friends with. So take a beat.
So it sounds like a lot of the reasons that you wanted to leave your finance job were kind of similar to where I was feeling in consulting. So, but tell me, how was your journey going from a previous career in finance and getting into tech? What did you learn along that career transition journey?
Yeah. I think in finance, I would dub that like the old school way of thinking about how to work. So there's very clearly defined roles, expectations, processes, and also there was a very defined career path and like the length of time that trajectory took. And that really frustrated me because it felt like I just had to be in my seat and just kind of grind it out. And there wasn't an opportunity to have as much like agency as I think I wanted. I was also very frustrated by like the pace of the work. I think that was for like risk mitigation in hindsight more than anything else. But I just honestly couldn't understand why it took months and months and months for us to get like simple, tech enhancements done to our trading platform. So
hmm
naturally, I was like, I want something that's fast paced, tech.
Right. But not
and it,
fast paced, like in the same way that deadlines felt in finance or in consulting. I feel
yeah,
like people used to say consulting is like hurry up and wait. Like you have to submit this deck, it has to be done by 8 a.m. tomorrow, but then it goes 3 weeks without anything
yeah,
happening. And that's why to me it was so hard. I struggled with these like artificial deadlines because it just didn't feel like there were any real reasons or consequences for like meeting project deadlines. Like everything was perceived to be an emergency, but then it's not
yeah.
actually.
Yeah, that's such a great phrase, hurry up and wait. I think finance definitely was more on that side, but with tech, maybe it's because I'm at, our parent company for Venmo is PayPal, and it's like one of the oldest tech companies in Silicon Valley, basically. They also will like implement and build things quickly, but the process in order to like get that thing built and implemented takes forever, and it's a lot of like circular talking. Did you get the approval from this person in order to do this? I think
hmm
the key difference is that at least you can get the process started with like very little effort, and it can be started by almost anyone. But once you kind of get the machine rolling, then that's when like everyone chimes in with their opinions and their need for approval, and that's when you kind of get basically
Mm.
the same environment of, oh my gosh, can we just get this thing done, and can we get it agreed upon.
Yeah, that is the problem with larger companies and especially relatively older ones. It's funny to now think
Hmm.
about like any company in Silicon Valley being older, but it's true, they are. But I think you're right that at least being able to take initiative and start projects when you see that there's a need or there's a gap gives you that sense of like contribution, even if those
Yeah.
projects do wind up taking longer. Whereas in consulting or in finance, it would just feel like a lot was contingent on other people and there was like little that you could do in the downtime.
Yeah. I was also very impressed when I first joined Venmo about the level at which people were contributing on what I felt like was relatively detailed decks. So, for example, my
Mm.
first manager was a senior director, and he would be in the decks with us, like making his own slides. I could
Wow.
not fathom like having an MD making their
No,
own slides when I
no.
was in finance. So that was a
When an
huge
MD makes a
yeah.
slide, it is a white Google Doc and it has black writing on it in
Yeah.
size, 40 font, and that's it.
Yeah, you definitely the sense of like my title doesn't dictate like what I can do was more evident in tech, both from like above and below. So like I could do more than what my title would have suggested, but also it wasn't that below a senior director, a GM to like get in the weeds and get stuff done if they had to do it and they were the
Yeah.
best person to do it.
I love that. Like, no one's above any work. Everybody's working towards common goals and like a
Yeah,
common product or a common feature, a common output that everybody's willing to grind for.
exactly.
So, if someone else were looking to make the switch from a finance job into tech, what advice would you give them now, having gone through it yourself?
I have advice that I think is not super applicable, and then I have advice that I think is applicable. The not super applicable one was because I worked in an investing role, we actually had a ton of access to research, and also we used to be able to sit in on these like investor day meetings where the CFO, the CEO, or like the investor relations persons from the company would come into our office and talk to us about like their quarter's performance. So I got to learn a lot about how tech businesses run from that perspective. And I just like used all of the resources that I had available to me from my job to figure out like what actually is interesting and then also get into the weeds of like how do they run this business. And the I think more applicable way of approaching this is honestly working with your network and trying to figure out people who have done a similar transition that you are interested in doing and seeing how they've done it and what resources they utilized, whether it's like blogs or courses or even like an approach some people used to tell me is go into like the SEC filings. A bunch of these companies are public. If you want to know what's most important to them, it's going to be in those documents and you just have to
Mm,
read them.
wow.
Yeah.
Effort that I think
So
a lot of people would not put in.
yeah, it's funny because like I do a lot of MBA interviews for MBA grads or candidates who want like internships on our team. And one of the first questions I usually ask them is like, how do we make money? And if they don't know how Venmo makes money, then I'm like, do you actually want this job? Because your entire responsibility is going to be figuring out like, how can we grow this business to make more money? So there's a lot of resources that are out there and you just need to understand like where they are, actually read them, and then be honest with yourself if this is something that's interesting to you.
Yeah, I think it is important when you move into tech to be aligned with the mission of the company that you join
Hmm.
because the context of what you're going to be working on every day is going to be on your mind all the time. So, like you said, if you're not interested in finding out how Venmo makes money and you don't care to find out, like that is going to be much more mentally taxing than working for a company that you're really interested in what they do, you're interested in the problem that they're solving, you have your own independent thoughts about it. I think it's a lot smoother of a transition to get into a job that you're actually going to be invested in and care about.
Yeah, for sure. It's all about showing that there's a genuine interest and then you have enough initiative to like go off of that interest to do something.
Yeah. And I think you also mentioned your network, which I think is really important when you're looking to pivot. I reached out to my friends who had left Accenture. I actually had a friend who left to become a chief of staff at a media company. And I went to her apartment for a day and we got lunch. I just watched her work and I just tried to figure out okay, what is a chief of staff job, which I'd love to talk to you a bit more about because I know you were also a
Yeah.
chief of staff. And then having that knowledge in the back of my head about okay, this is kind of what this role is. This is what I know about it. Then I could actually bring that to my interviews and I wasn't just making everything up on the spot.
Yeah.
Especially if you're moving into an earlier stage company, I think it's good to have a sense for what you might contribute, what you might bring to that company and have some ideas going in.
I did startup work way back in the day. It was like an internship. And that was so ambiguous because it was like a 7-person company. They were in an accelerator
Yeah.
that honestly, the total lack of structure and the amount of freedom I had as an intern is is honestly what influenced me to get a finance job because I was like, I need structure. I need someone to tell me what to do because this was way too much and I don't think I did anything for a summer. It's like the traumas teach you the most.
Honestly, that's so true. I agree. When I look back on my early career experience, I don't know if at age 22 I would have been secure and knowledgeable enough and organized enough to actually be in the uncertainty of a startup environment and to
Mm-hmm.
actually be able to deliver any value. So maybe it was for the best that, we started our careers in one of these very echo chambery corporate type of roles and got that
Yeah.
structure because I think that sets you up well for the things that you do next, even if you go to something that's totally messy and crazy like early stage startups.
Yeah. Totally agree.
So we have the chief of staff role in common, but I'm so curious to hear your take on it. I think we've had very different experiences being in that role. And when you described your chief of staff role, you said it was a really well defined career path, it had job security, and I could not relate to that at all. Mine was the total opposite. Working for a 7-person startup, being a chief of staff certainly did not have a well defined path or job security. So tell me a little bit about that and how did that feel when you had to transition away from, what you felt was a really secure position to going into tech and taking a little bit more of a risk?
Yeah. So it's basically like an in-house MBA. So you are tied to an executive and you go to all of their meetings, you sit in on all of their calls, you do a lot of, the foundational work that leads up to their important decision making and
It's
things
okay. You
like
can just
that.
say it, the bitch work.
Yeah, you do the bitch work for hours.
Yeah.
But at the end of it, basically, if you've done a good job, your exec will give you this golden ticket to wherever you want to go in the company and you get their executive sponsorship. So that was the really crazy thing about this chief of staff role because it was half MBA, half military service where do your time. You have a brotherhood of people around you who have also done their time
Oh
and
my
done their
God.
tour of duty. But at
Yeah.
the end of it,
Oh, I
you are
hate that term.
set.
People say that all the
Yeah.
time about the chief of staff role. I'm like, oh, I hate that term, but it's kind of true.
Yeah. Basically, they warn you even too, going into it, it's going to be it's going to be intense. It's probably going to be pretty rough. But if you do a good job, you'll learn a bunch. You'll get a bunch of trust and you'll have so much leverage within the company. And where I really struggled was I didn't see myself in the company long term. So I
Yeah.
was building up all of this goodwill and credibility and I was banking it for what purpose in the end because I wasn't going to use it.
Yeah, if you're not going to cash in, is the time worth it? It's like going to Dave
Yeah,
and Buster's, but then you don't even get the prize at the end.
exactly.
But it's not fun
So
like Dave and Buster's.
exactly. Occasionally if you get to fly to, Shanghai on the business jet, that's cool, but I was doing this in the middle of COVID. I was in my tiny little apartment with my brother, working until 10 p.m. at night, and
Yeah.
it
So I'm
didn't
guessing
feel
you
that
did
fun.
not get flown to Shanghai on the private jet.
No, unfortunately. I think if I waited maybe one more year, I would have gotten it, but
But for
nope.
your peace of mind, I don't know if it's worth it.
Yeah, exactly. So I think I really started to reflect hard about how much do I want to do something for truthfully an external validation and to outwardly look successful versus like how much do I want to do something that will help me have a better, more balanced life altogether outside of like what I do as a profession.
I feel like we've been on such similar journeys with the way that we've developed our relationship with work and the way that that has evolved over the years.
Yeah.
I also have gone through that renaissance where I've realized that I need to care about what I'm doing. I, similarly to you, did not feel like I idolized anyone within Accenture enough that I would want to see myself doing their job in 5, 10, 15 years. So I knew that I had to get out for that reason. And you went through that same thing, being like, oh, yeah, I'm cashing in these chief of staff good karma points, but for what? I don't
Hmm.
actually want to be any of these people. And then you start to do things more for your own validation, for yourself, for the things that you want to work on and the things that you want to learn, and not just because it looks good to other people.
Yeah. It
Hashtag
took
growth.
I know, it took a while, especially being probably like type A people pleaser who is constantly anxious and impatient. The move to California helped with that. Like it really chilled me out. I think being in New York, I was very high strung.
Mm-hmm. I was going to ask you that because New York to me feels like an echo chamber in and of itself. I don't even live in the city, I live in the suburbs. But it is so competitive, fast paced. Everybody's so bright. Everybody is like doing the maximum all the time, working, partying, barely sleeping, repeat. So, yeah, how has living in LA affected your relationship with work and like how you view that whole cycle?
I would definitely say because it's so beautiful out here and I kind of live in like the burbs of LA, I have incredible access to the outdoors, to like there are mountain ranges in my front and backyard. It makes me want to finish my job as quickly and as well as possible, but I don't want to be here for hours. I want to be outside. I want to be like in nature, spending time with my friends and family. And also, I think somewhat unique to probably where I live. I'm sure if I lived in like Santa Monica, where a lot of younger people live, it would be different. But it's not as focused on jobs here in the sense that like everyone does something different and they don't really identify, or at least they don't introduce themselves by their career and by their job. Like they kind of present themselves as a whole person first and then you can ask them what they do. But I feel like it's the opposite in New York where it's like, hi, I'm Emily, I work in finance.
Yeah,
And by the way, I have other personality traits, I think,
but barely, like barely.
but barely.
Yeah, I think that's for real. But also like when you're in LA, everybody that you meet is, in the entertainment industry or they're like working, they're waiting tables because they're trying to get into the entertainment industry. So
Yeah.
when I was out there, I noticed that a lot of that pressure was taken off because when at the time I was like, "Oh yeah, I work in consulting." They were like, "Oh, okay, whatever. I'm trying to write for Netflix." And you're like, "Oh, okay. All right." So like this whole corporate ladder thing, this is kind of bullshit.
Yeah, yeah. I am constantly surrounded by engineers because my husband works at NASA Jet Propulsion Labs. And that is like, I feel like a completely different, like professional personality type that I wasn't exposed to when I was in New York. Like,
Right. When you leave and
they
you realize
love
not
what they
everyone.
do.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And, like, not
They
everyone
like
works on
talk
Wall
about
Street.
bolts. Yep. And, like the different types of aluminum that you can make stuff out of. And it's honestly really endearing to see how much people love what they do, but also it has nothing to do with what I do. So we just find other things to bond over because it's not going to be work.
Yeah. I think that's healthy, having people who are in your life who have such a different career path, like,
Hmm.
even, like, people like my dad, he's, like, a blue collar guy, and it just sometimes puts things into perspective that, like, these challenges at work are just, like, not the most riveting thing or, like, your industry is not the be all end all and like
Yeah.
there are other things going on in the world and it makes you realize like you are smaller than you think and there is so much out there and the more that you're exposed to that I think the better and the more worldly of a view you can have about work that isn't so like New York echo chambery everyone
Yeah.
works on Wall Street.
I used to have this tradition where I would like go backpacking for at least a week at a time. So like completely isolated in the woods, like all of my gear is on my back. This is like a tradition me and my husband would do because I needed to disconnect and truthfully feel insignificant in the world in the best way possible.
Yes.
And when I was able to like extract myself from the day to day that my life was in New York and realize that I am not the center of the universe and like go on these vacations, I felt so much better. And I think in LA and where I live and with my current job, that's been more like intertwined in my day to day so that I don't have to go on these like massive excursions as often. I still do just for fun because I like them, but it wasn't, me
It's not like an
escaping
existential
anything.
crisis trip that you have to go
Exactly.
on, twice a year.
Yeah. Honestly, it's
Yeah.
like that's actually the best piece of advice I have. Like, go somewhere where you realize like you are very insignificant and you are one tiny piece of like this enormous puzzle of Earth. And it'll
Yes.
actually make you feel a lot better.
Retweet. Like every once in a while when I think really hard about outer space, I'm just like, oh shit. And then I have an
Yeah.
existential crisis and I'm like, nothing matters. I'm like, what I'm doing doesn't matter. My life, I mean, it matters because I'm living it, but like, it really doesn't matter.
Yeah. So
And
just like live it
sometimes,
the way you want to live it.
yeah, exactly. Don't do shit for other people's validation, like do what
Hmm.
makes you feel excited and good. And yeah, go on your little existential crisis trip to help you realize that it all doesn't matter.
It's called balance.
Yeah, look it up. So, in moving across the country for this role, because you started your career out in New York, and then this role took you to LA, or I guess your husband took you to LA. How was that process of navigating moving and like getting a new job at the same time? How did that all go?
Yeah. This is gonna like call back to advice I had said earlier from my brother, which was basically like make the best of the situation you're in. So basically, from the moment I joined JP Morgan in New York, I was like, I want to leave and I want to go to LA. Not necessarily because I had come to the realization that this wasn't a good fit for me, but I was impatient. So having that advice from my brother of like figure it out within the confines and limitations of your company, I tried to look basically like how can I transfer to an LA office of JP Morgan, or how can I do my job remotely like once that became a thing with the pandemic. So that's actually what I did. I cashed in a few like good karma points with
Some
my
favors.
boss. Yeah, and I was just like, hey, I've been doing a really solid job. Can I live in LA? And initially it was supposed to be a temporary, like few month thing. But while being out here, it was way easier for me to like actually get other hiring managers that were based in LA to like seriously consider me, because
Mm-hmm.
I think pre-pandemic it was always difficult to like break through and really get someone to be convinced that you were moving and you're willing to move and this was like something that you wanted for yourself. So once I was able to find a position that I was really interested in, I basically was like, I have to stay in LA and I will make the effort to like make sure that I am seeing the team, that I am like working with you guys in the best way possible. And
Making all your
generally,
concessions
yeah,
to make it work.
exactly. And then they were like, yeah, makes sense. Like we'll figure it
Mm-hmm.
out. Maybe we'll be able to get an office in LA too. And I was like, that's great. Yeah. I will be
Yeah,
the
do
person
that.
that like
I'll
draws
start
the
it.
line in the sand. Exactly.
Yeah, I think it is, it's easier if you're a high performer and
Hmm.
you have a little bit of that leverage and
Yeah.
people know that they can trust you when you ask for one of these really big, life changing kind of favors or
Mhm.
requests. It helps.
Yeah, for sure.
So you talked about moving for JP Morgan. And then when you were looking for your job at Venmo, you felt like it was a lot easier to get a job in LA because you were already based in LA.
Yeah. And I also think being able to really make a case for yourself through the hiring process. I think these are like the things that all of these articles and probably like TikTok recruiting tip people say, like, be able to negotiate things that aren't necessarily compensation. Like, this is one of the things that I said because it mattered a lot to me. And so I basically was like, I'd be so incredibly happy to take this role, but it has to be based in LA. And it's not like oh yeah, like we'll make it work. Like you have to guarantee
Write
that
it
I
in my
will
offer
not
letter.
exactly like be asked to come back to New York or like have to go to San Jose. And they said yes. And honestly, it was super, super worth it because I think it's really enhanced other parts of my life that allow me to like show up to work and not just have this like existential dread all of the time.
That's amazing. How much more productive you can be when you don't have existential dread for 3 hours a day. It's crazy.
Yeah. Oh.
Look, it's mutually beneficial. Company's happy, you're happy, being productive. Everyone's winning. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
I love that.
Yeah.
I think we can go to the lightning round now. Are you ready?
Oh, I am ready.
Okay. So, over the course of your career, what has taught you more, your failures or your successes?
100% my failures. Nothing quite slaps you in the face and makes you realize like either what you want or what you did wrong, like a massive failure. And I think without the failures, I wouldn't have the clarity of like what to do next. I think successes can almost lull you into this like false sense of security
Mm,
of how did I arrive there? Whereas a failure, I feel like, is way more clean cut.
yes, that slap in the face. That'll get you there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm curious to know the answer to question number 2, especially because you were so set on living in LA. So, when you were deciding about this role and generally in your past, passion or paycheck?
I think you might be surprised by this. I think now it's just paycheck because originally I felt like I needed so much fulfillment in my work and I was willing to like do whatever to find that fulfillment. And once I said, like, this is just a job that I should, still try really hard at, but it's just going to help me be able to survive and do the things that I actually want, I actually ended up feeling a lot better about it. It's a very strange, like, change of mindset that happens. Like, you go into it and, like, the less you care, the better it becomes in a certain sense. And the more you care, the more toxic and the more stressful it can be.
Oh my God, mic drop. There we go. I also choose paycheck for different reasons. I've talked about this in some of my episodes. One, it's expensive. Just to stay alive, I have learned is a very
Mm-hmm.
expensive task. But also for me, I didn't pop out of the womb with like a natural born passion. Like I'm a singer, but it's not like the thing I wanted to do all day, every day for the rest of my life. And I feel like actually having these like really enriching work experiences has helped me to understand myself better and to know what I'm excited about. Don't even know if I would call any of it passions. Like work is not my passion. My passion is margaritas and beaches, but
Oh, yeah,
um
same.
but like so the paycheck actually like is what has given me some avenues to explore things that are interesting to me that I wouldn't have known about if I had just been like so like passion driven. Okay, this is number 3. A new question that we're featuring on the podcast. At the beginning of your career, how delulu were you?
Oh, man. I had like Stockholm syndrome, to be honest.
Yeah,
So I like got into it and then I realized this probably wasn't what I wanted, but I felt like I needed to stay there until I had like tangible things to walk out of the experience with.
same.
So
I
yeah,
wish we
whether
had been talking about this 6 years ago, like if we had had these conversations then. It's so hard to crystallize your thoughts though. Like when you're
yeah.
23 and you don't really know anything about work.
Yeah, it just felt like everything was the biggest deal and everything was super critical and stressful and it was just something that we had to do and had to experience, but I don't know if I believe that as much now. Like if I had entered the workforce maybe a year or two ago, I think I'd probably think a little bit more critically about what I was willing to tolerate in terms of how I perceive discomfort in a role and if I actually did think it was worth it or not.
My gosh, what a good phrase. How you perceive discomfort and like to what level you're okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
What a great gem to leave this conversation on. Emily, I just want to say thank you so much for coming to have this conversation, for helping me to put into context and into words some of the things that I have always felt about my experience that I just didn't quite have the language to express before. So thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for having me.